Recently I covered the top 10 overrated Pokemon in BDSP, but what Pokemon are underrated in these games? In today's video, I want to give a spotlight to the top 10 underrated Pokemon in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. These are Pokemon that I felt were pretty overlooked on your journey. But if you want to show some love to these Pokemon, make sure you leave a like below and subscribe for more content just like this. With that said, let's get started by starting with number 10. Number 10 on today's list actually starts us off with the Pokemon I mentioned deserving more love in the overrated list, being Azumarill. Azumarill is a really worthwhile fairy substitute if you're willing to wait until Pastoria City for a fairy. While this may seem like a bit of a while to wait, Azumarill actually is very worthwhile for a few battles at the end of your adventure. Azumarill's typing of Water and Fairy allows for strong matchups against Bertha, Flint, and Candace's teams, which is actually really strong. I recommend taking a couple attempts to make sure the Marill you catch in the Great Marsh has huge power. Since despite being tedious to catch Pokemon in the Great Marsh, I do think this will be overall worthwhile. Huge power makes Azumarill into one of the strongest attackers in the game, which should help you a lot with even more moderate matchups such as Byron's Gym. Azumarill is also a rather helpful Pokemon against your rival, especially if you chose Torterra as your starter. Your rival would have Infernape as their starter in this instance, and Azumarill is a really strong response to both the fire and fighting attacks this Infernape would have. On top of this, it's also really good against Barry's Heracross and Snorlax, regardless of the starter he chooses. With that said, on your next journey, make sure to consider Azumarill for your team. Number 9 goes to none other than Toxicroak, which is actually a really interesting fighting type for these games. To start with, there are now underground encounters where you can actually find Croagunk in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is one of the big reasons I actually ranked Toxicroak above Azumarill. This early access allows you to obtain Croagunk before your battle with Gardenia, which gives you a strong poison type really early on. Typically, people eye fire types here, yet Croagunk is a very threatening option early on. You'll also be able to utilize Croagunk against Maylin's Lucario, before evolving it in the Toxicroak to handle Byron and Candace's teams. I will mention that I don't think Toxicroak is really useful at all in the Elite Four, because sadly, most of the Elite Four members have strong coverage for Toxicroak. The usefulness of Toxicroak truly comes more so in the early game though, because this provides you a strong fighting type to replace Infernape with if you want to choose another starter, which is why I gotta show Toxicroak some love by ranking it at number 9. Our number 8 option today comes in the form of Bronzong, one of the best Sinnoh Steel types. Bronzong, truthfully, was initially higher up on my list. However, unlike the original Diamond and Pearl, we have access to Magnemite as well, which in my eyes hurt the uniqueness of what Bronzong used to provide teams in these games. Even considering Magnezone, however, Bronzong still definitely not only is the more useful steel between these two, but it's somehow still a very underrated steel in these games. Bronzong has the Steel and Psychic typing, with the potential to utilize the ability Levitate as well as to handle its ground weakness. If you find one with Levitate, you're fairly set for a lot of in-game opponents. Bronzong is rather strong against battles such as Candace, Bertha, Lucian, and even to an extent, Cynthia. I consider Bronzong basically the Empoleon replacement for your team, similar to how Toxicroak is Infernape's. While you lack the starter typing yet again, in most cases Empoleon's value comes from the fact it's a steel type, which unlike water is actually fairly limited in these games. Because of this, I think people should definitely be considering Bronzong more, and that's why we have it at number 8 on today's list. Our number 7 option is one of our first absolute powerhouse Pokemon, being Gardevoir. Gardevoir, having the Fairy and Psychic typing, allows it a plethora of strong matchups, such as Maylene, Lucian, and Cynthia. However, Gardevoir's wide spread of TM options allows for you to optimize this depending on the battle to handle your opponent's roster as easily as possible. You can adapt its moveset against opponents such as Crasher Wake, Fantina, Byron, and Bertha, all with a few TMs, such as Thunderbolt or Focus Blast. Focus Blast, Thunderbolt, Shadow Ball, and Dazzling Gleam should be able to handle most opponents in the game, with all of these besides Shadow Ball being available in Veilstone. Gardevoir is a very early threat to most opponents, and I think it should especially be considered by players who lack a reliable method to evolve their Kadabra into Alakazam, as Gardevoir is still a very terrifying psychic to use in-game. Our number 6 option is definitely one I don't consider most of you to even want to capture, but it's something that I think even I have discounted too much in these games. Our 6th option is none other than the infamous Spiritomb. Despite having gained a fairy weakness in these games, this Pokemon is still terrifying, because there aren't that many fairies even being used by trainers. This allows Spiritomb to at least be a usable Pokemon in most boss fights, as long as you put in the time to encounter this. I probably should have listed it at least as an honorable mention, if not an official member of my Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl team over Snorlax. If you enter the Grand Underground through Oreburgh, you can actually run around a small loop in order to keep the 32 NPCs you need. All you need to do is run in and out of the rooms and keep talking to NPCs until you hit 32 unique ones. This route in-game is sadly one of the easiest to find all 32 of them, but it does allow for you to encounter Spiritomb before a lot of important battles, such as Maylene and Fantina, where you should be able to use this Pokemon to great success. The encounter definitely is not for the faint of heart. However, if you want to put in the time, this will definitely be an extremely valuable asset to your team. Our 5th Pokemon is actually a water type that I feel got underrated purely for how useful Gyarados is, being Gastrodon. Gastrodon is quite literally the defensive equivalent to how strong Gyarados is in these games, with the water ground typing being obnoxious against most battles. If you have Storm Drain, Gastrodon is useful against most battles, such as Crasher Wake, Byron, Volkner, Bertha, Flint, and Cynthia's teams, while still having potential to even be a valuable asset against Fantina's team. Gastrodon really just needs a water move. Earth Power and Recover can best most trainers in these games. I do, however, recommend running Ice Beam in that 4th slot, as it's very useful to round out your coverage against Cynthia. Even if you really want to use Gyarados on your team still, Gastrodon is a strong partner handling both electric and rock types on Gyarados' behalf. This also gives you a more defensive water type to allow Gyarados to sweep. Overall, I get Gyarados as a deservingly popular option in these games, but consider Gastrodon too. Our 4th place option here comes in the form of Drapion. Drapion is definitely in a bit of a weird place. Since it's a dark type, you most likely won't be able to utilize for Fantina without overleveling. However, Drapion's use mostly comes from the ability to hold its use against a couple key opponents, with the biggest use being against Lucian. Because this is a dark and poison type, you actually will end up being able to not only give your poison type an immunity to Lucian's psychic options, but you'll also be neutral to Pokemon such as Medicham using fighting moves. Lucian's one of your most difficult battles with Infernape, so even having such a surefire way against his team is honestly really worthwhile. Drapion's one weakness also means that in most cases, you can at least take a single attack or two. So even in battles where you don't necessarily hold an advantage, besides Bertha's team, it's actually very rare you'll be at a disadvantage either once you evolve. I think this is definitely a strong option though, that if anything, more Infernape players should definitely be considered for their late game teams. Our 3rd place finisher is another ground type, being Hepadon. Hepadon is a really strong physically defensive wall, with the ability to take hits from pretty much any physical attacker in these games. even as a Hippopotas, you actually have fairly decent stats to use, so you aren't going to be useless before evolving. Hepadon is a really valuable ground to utilize for your Elite Four runs, with the ability to handle most members with a combination of Rest, Rock Slide, Ice Fang, and Earthquake. You can easily just add on a Chesto Berry to heal yourself instantly in order to defeat a few more Pokemon before you need the swap. The only battle I wouldn't really use Hepadon for would be Lucian, because most of his Pokemon are special attackers. Outside of the Elite Four though, you'll still have Hepadon against teams such as Byron and Volkner. However, I'd really only use Hepadon against Luxray and Ambipom, as Raichu has Surf, and Octillery will just always defeat you. Hepadon is a strong defensive behemoth that definitely deserves more respect in my opinion. In a similar notion to our last option, our number 2 Pokemon is another defensive monster, being Blissy. I know a lot of you probably gagged reading Blissy, but it's actually really strong for a few opponents in these games. Because of your absurd special defense, if you increase to happiness ahead of time, you should have a Blissy in time for Fantina's gym, which you can defeat extremely easily with the addition of Blissy. You can probably get by with running Ice Beam and Thunderbolt for most battles, with Soft Boiled obtained at level 44, and then probably Focus Blast as your last move for a last-ditch response to Byron if necessary. I'm sure a lot of people don't want to take the time to train up Blissy, but if nothing else, this is a lifesaver against Fantina due to the lack of strong dark types at that stage. Especially if you're playing Shining Pearl, the only good dark you'd have in my opinion is Houndoom, as the others either aren't worth training up or are exclusive to Brilliant Diamond. This fight alone is reason enough in my eyes to consider Blissy. However, I'm sure you'll be able to utilize it against a lot of opponents later on, such as Volkner and Lucian. Our final Pokemon on today's list is none other than Torterra. Torterra is actually a really strong starter for the early game portion of your journey, since even against opponents Torterra would normally struggle against, such as Gardenia, you should be able to easily find encounters to enable its success, such as Starly or Croagunk. Torterra is able to also shine really well in the late game, as a very strong response to Volkner and Bertha's teams. And it's also able to learn recovery through synthesis if you're playing a hardcore Nuzlocke, and banning the use of healing items. Torterra also gains access to Earthquake upon evolving from Grottle, which gives you access to one of the best moves in the game very early on. Torterra, when paired with a strong fighting and flying type, should easily be able to shine on your adventure. I know I hype up Infernape a lot, which I definitely don't plan to stop anytime soon. But I do think that in the midst of all of that, I've definitely overlooked how useful Torterra can actually be in these games. Overall, Torterra definitely deserves a bit more spotlight, which is why it's ranked at number 1 today. Well, that's the end of our list for the top 10 most underrated Pokemon in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. What did you think? Be sure to let me know in the comments below what Pokemon you think are the most underrated. I'm really curious as to how you all feel about certain mons. Make sure as always to leave a like and subscribe for more top 10s just like this. Hey guys, thank you for enjoying another Mystic Umbreon video. It's exciting times for the Pokemon franchise, and I look forward to the coming months where it just keeps getting better. I want to give a huge thanks to my phenomenal team, and for the amazing art done each week by Danny the Demon. I couldn't do all of this without them. If you guys are wanting some more bite-sized Mystic Umbreon content, please check out my TikTok, where I upload daily, as well as the Mystic Umbreon Shorts channel. If y'all enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Be sure to leave a comment too. It really helps us out. I think it's time to wrap this up though. I'm Mystic Umbreon, and I'll see you next time with some more amazing Pokemon content.